For our regular listeners, today's episode will be a little bbit heavier. Usually we kind of try and keep it family friendly. We don't try to talk a lot about too heavy a subjects. But today's episode, it's going to be a little bit heavier. We're going to talk about genocide and events parallel to that in the world.
Still family friendly. We don't get graphic.
Right. It's not graphic, but it's heavier topics. And if you're listening with younger kids, this may not be the best episode to listen with, but just be a little bit aware. Maybe you want to listen to it by yourself ahead of time.
You're going to get questions from your 10-year-old. Good morning, Conversational Chaos fans. This is another spectacular edition of Conversational Chaos. We are in the studio this morning with Jason, of course, and the Rage Monster. How are you doing this morning, Jason?
Just wonderful.
Just wonderful.
Yes.
I know that we have some heavy-duty stuff coming up today.
Yeah.
I know that. Do we want to start with the heavy-duty stuff, or do we want to start with some shenanigans first?
Maybe should we give an explanation of what our heavy-duty stuff is and then get into the lighter stuff?
Yeah, sure.
We've run into a little bit of a scheduling issue. This may be episode 15, maybe episode 16. We don't know yet today. We have a special guest. Our normally scheduled every 5-episode guest was supposed to come in today, but due to some other issues...
Scheduling conflict,
yeah. But this was one we were excited about because we've been looking forward to this guest for a while. He has some personal experiences with the Armenian genocide. He's going to give us some details of how that has impacted his life and some of the things that are going on with the demonstrations that happen in D.C. and some other news that's going on in the world in regards to that. Something he follows closely and something he's passionate about. And this was going to be a 2-part episode almost, where we were going to talk to him during one, and then we were going to talk about some parallel ideas in a companion episode, which was going to be second, but now it might be first.
Yeah, this is going to throw our schedule all off.
A little bit. So hopefully you can follow. If you followed through the last episode of the movies, you'll be fine through this.
Oh, man. One of my favorites. Even though I don't think it was the greatest. I mean, as far as our content went, it was still one of my favorites to do. I loved the movie episode. And if you haven't listened to it, you got to go back and listen to it. Any 80s kid would love it. Okay, so we're going to just dive right in.
Let's dive right in. We'll save the lighter stuff for the end, maybe.
Okay.
We did have 2 light episodes. We did have the movies and the wonderful one before that about teeth.
About what?
Teeth.
Oh, the teeth episode. Did I tell you I got some feedback?
Wonderful.
About the teeth episode?
Yeah.
Oh, man. For some reason, I think I talked about this in our movie episode too, but I did get feedback from the teeth episode from a few people that basically said don't ever talk about teeth again because it made them so uncomfortable that they literally wanted to either fast forward or just turn it off. Okay, so we won't talk about teeth. That'll
go into our chest of topics to never discuss again.
Yeah, we do have a running list of things we will never discuss. The teeth will go into that list. In there. But specifically today, we were going to discuss genocide in general.
Right.
How is it that genocide occurs? What is genocide? A lot of people don't even really know what that term even really means.
Yeah, there's actually a definition for it now that was defined in 1946. It wasn't a term before that.
48.
Yes, I think you're right.
What did you call it when the Nazis were exterminating the Jews? They had to come up with a word.
Right.
But the word they came up with blankets other instances where people groups are being, I guess, singled out for destruction. I think that's one of the key terms in the definition of genocide is the deliberate destruction of something. Destruction of a people group based on religious, based on ethnic, based on cultural features. There's really only 2 things. It's, when it comes to genocide, there is raw hatred somewhere.
Yeah, that's part of the definition. It's got to be discrimination against a group.
It stems from just hatred of something, whether it be the way some people look or for the Germans, they just wanted to be pure. So they thought they should get rid of everybody that wasn't pure Aryan or as pure as they could get. I mean, they understood that, there was no real pure Aryans, but so one of the things that kind of bothers me a little bit, the Germans were really good at genocide.
Yeah, if you look at the list of the top genocides by death toll, the Holocaust is number 1, but number like 3, 4, 5, and 6 is them
Germans
against other people. Yeah.
Yeah. They killed everybody systematically, and
They did.
honestly, they were ruthlessly efficient at it.
Yeah,
It was like 50% or 80% of the Romani population, so like the gypsy population in Europe, they were able to single these people out and just literally just push them into their little camp.
right. It was 2/3 of the Jewish population, 10% of Ukraine's population. It doesn't give a percentage here, but 3 million Polish people.
Other than Jews in Europe, I think the Nazis, specifically the Nazis, were responsible for like 14 million other deaths
Yeah.
that were not related to warfare. So if you talk about in World War II, something like 20 million Russians died in
Right.
World War II. A lot of them were civilians, obviously. They didn't have 20 million soldiers, but
Right.
a lot of that was direct result of warfare. I don't think that counts specifically.
I think
towards
they keep
their
those
number.
separate
Yeah.
numbers.
During the battles of Stalingrad and, what was it, Leningrad or Stalingrad? No, I can't remember.
I don't know. You're a geography guy.
But during some of those battles, it was just a war of attrition. It was just
Yeah.
bomb, 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 do whatever you could do to just destroy anybody. And they killed hundreds of thousands, millions of civilians. Yeah, the Germans. And they did it in a very short period of time.
They did. Yeah. It wasn't.
A span of like 10 years, they managed to kill 20 some odd million people just because they hated them, not because they were killing them in battle. But then you got the Soviets. Soviets were really good at it too.
Yeah, they're on the list a couple times as well.
Yeah, and they did it in a, I would say, at least when the Nazis, not to say this is good, at least when the Nazis were killing people, they were killing them relatively quickly. I mean, yes, they starved lots of people to death.
Yeah.
Do something deliberate, and it was fairly quick. I'm not saying they didn't suffer ahead of time, but it wasn't like a long, drawn-out procedure. The Nazis understood that they needed to be efficient at it because there were so many peoples they wanted to get rid of. They set up these camps specifically to do that. That was the whole point. I don't remember what the percentage was, but I want to say it's like 80% of the people that arrived on a train at Auschwitz or Birkenau, like 80% of those people on that train were dead within a day. And it was the only ones that were kept alive were the ones that were able to work. I mean, I think it was on the gates of Auschwitz. It says, Arbeit macht frei, which is, work will set you free.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the whole point. They were taking the strong and the capable and the able off to work, and everybody else they were just killing. So women, children, old people, people that were sick or whatever, they just killed them. And so they did it really quickly. Whereas the Soviets, the way that the Soviet government worked kind of boggles the mind, really. They had these central repositories for food. So if you were a Soviet citizen and you were a farmer, you kept nothing that you grew. If you were like a grain farmer, you kept nothing. You kept no livestock. You kept nothing. Everything belonged to the state, literally everything. So when it was harvest time, you would harvest. The state came and took everything. They took everything and they brought it to their food warehouses, where there was a group of people that oversaw the food warehouses. And then the people who actually worked in the warehouses were like normal citizens. It was almost like getting jury duty. You would get a notice from the Soviet government that says, you have duty this week from Saturday to Sunday or whatever the days were at this food warehouse. So you don't go to whatever your regular job is. And it didn't matter what you were. If you were a doctor or an attorney or whatever, you didn't go to your regular job that week. You went to the food warehouse and you spent the time distributing food. That was what you did.
Oh, wow.
And so they had these giant warehouses and they were centrally located all over the country. But what they did was they just didn't give food to people. That was like their big idea. The Russians do not like Ukrainians. Large amounts of Ukraine's population, I want to say it was like 50% of their population, died of starvation. Deliberate starvation. The Soviet government just refused to send food. And the ironic thing is, where did a lot of it come from? Ukraine was the quote-unquote breadbasket of the Soviet Union. That was where they grew a ton of, basically like the American Midwest.
Right.
We grow lots of wheat, soy, and corn and all that kind of stuff out in like Iowa and Nebraska and stuff. Ukraine was like Russia's Midwest, yeah. So they grew a ton of food there, but the government immediately took it and just never gave any of it back. So millions of people starved to death.
Yeah.
And it was the same thing in Kazakhstan. I want to say a large percentage of the indigenous Kazakh population, same thing. They just didn't like them, so they just didn't give them food. And since the state took everything, there was no food to get.
Right.
Couldn't even forage. It was just nothing
There's
there.
nothing left.
Surprisingly enough, when it came to places like Siberia, they didn't really care. I mean, those people, they're very different. The Siberian Russians from Western.
European Russians.
The European Russians are very different. But the population was so small, and they lived a hard life anyway.
Right.
So
that's where they sent the people they didn't like anyways.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the Soviets and their purges during the 1930s,
Yeah.
I mean, that was hundreds of thousands of people. They literally just the people literally disappeared. I mean, you're talking 1984 stuff.
Right.
Where literally people just became, I guess the term from, did you ever read 1984? Yeah. The term unperson?
Oh,
it's
right.
like a person who just disappeared is now an unperson.
Yeah.
Like the person never existed. And that's kind of how the Soviets treated. They just kind of took people, sent them off to the gulags, worked them to death, or just let them starve to death. They just didn't care.
Yeah.
So they were pretty ruthless about the way that they went about doing it. But again, they were pretty efficient at it. They killed an awful lot of people just because they could.
Yeah,
millions.
That's a lot.
Well, think about Rwanda. We'll use that as an example.
So we went from the Russian and the German ones, which were like institutional
effectively,
genocides.
Yes.
And then there's also the ones where it's just groups against each other, local groups, where they just, one gets an upper hand and
yeah,
that's just the end
you
of
think
the other
about Rwandan genocide. You think
Right.
about Khmer Rouge.
Yeah.
Cambodia. And typically, funny enough, when you have a genocide, somebody gets in trouble, right?
Supposed to be.
Yeah, typically.
Right. Yeah.
Somebody gets in trouble. In the form of the Soviets, people got purged.
Right.
After these genocides.
After.
And nobody was held legally responsible necessarily. People were purged. Lots of people got purged by the Soviet government, partially because Stalin was completely insane.
Yeah.
He was totally nuts. But after his death, a lot of stuff changed within the Soviet Union. So he was kind of crazy. And I don't think he helped much of this craziness that was going on there. A lot of the Nazis were charged with war crimes
Right.
against humanity at Nuremberg. But then you get
Yeah, that was the term before they came up with genocide. That's what they used.
crimes against humanity.
Yeah.
But the Rwandan genocide, it was really strange because it's literally just one people's hatred against another.
Yeah.
So you had the two ethnic groups in Rwanda. The two biggest ones were the Hutus and the Tutsis, I think,
Right,
if I'm
that's it.
remembering correctly. And the Tutsis had the political control,
Mm-hmm.
but they were the minority population. And
Right.
so the Hutus believed that they were being oppressed by the Tutsis. Whether they were or not, who knows? The answer is probably yes. They most likely were, especially if they really hated each other. And it was really strange because I remember watching the movie Hotel Rwanda.
Oh, I saw that one. That was tough.
That was not a pleasant movie to
Those
watch.
did not make our top 100,
No.
although it is a very powerful movie.
It is. It's actually a really good movie.
Yeah.
And Don Cheadle, who I can't remember the name of the main character now. It's a true story. It's based
Yeah.
on a true story. We'll say that loosely.
Right.
But it was amazing that even their passports or identification cards that they had their tribal affiliations labeled on it. So it was
Yeah.
really easy to separate and identify people. But that was one of the Hutus' gripes, is that anybody that was Hutu that had an identification card had the word Hutu was written on their identification card. So they were easily discriminated against
Yeah.
by the Tutsis because the Tutsis could identify who they were. Well, then the Hutus turned that around to the Tutsis.
Yeah.
And it was like 50% of the Tutsis in the country were massacred. And it was just out of pure hatred for one another in their own country.
It was 70%.
It was 70%?
Yeah.
Oh, it was just lots. And it was indiscriminate slaughter. They were just going from village to village, finding every Tutsi they could
Right.
find and just killing them.
Right in the street. And it was quick, too. They didn't last very long.
It was less than a year, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was brutal, too. It wasn't.
Yeah, they weren't shooting them. They were like
No.
cutting their heads off or their arms off with machetes and weird stuff like that.
Yeah. That was harsh.
But then you got Cambodian genocide, the Khmer Rouge.
Right.
That one was really odd as well because this was a political genocide because effectively you had an academic, that being Pol Pot, and a bunch of his cronies when they were in college basically came up with this idea that one of the biggest problems with Cambodia is that its population, which was about 6 million at the time, was about twice as large as the country can really sustain effectively. So their idea was, let's just get rid of half the population. And how do we do that? We'll just start killing people. That was kind of their idea. And they got really good at it too. A lot of people have heard the term killing fields. Well, that's where that term comes from. It actually comes from the Khmer Rouge genocide that occurred in Cambodia. These were people killing their own people, which is sort of weird. Right. I mean, it's really strange to have that happen. At least the Soviets, Ukrainians are ethnically not Russian. They're a different people. Right. So they were easily kind of singled out. Whereas in Cambodia, it was, you have a college education? Yeah, we're just going to kill you. That's going to benefit us. Oh, you're a teacher? Well, we're just going to kill you too. So it was just, they took anybody that had half a brain that could resist and or organize in that sense. They executed all of them. And then what they started doing is they started taking people from the cities, shipping them out to the country to become farmers.
Yeah.
That's really what they did. They just massive groups of people. And the scary part about it is that they enjoyed what they did. They had groups of people whose job it was to interrogate what they believed to be political dissidents or whatever. Yeah. So they would take these people to these makeshift prisons, which a lot of the schools in the country were turned into prisons.
Oh,
that's where
that's kind of scary.
Yeah, they just turned them all into prisons, barbed wire, all that stuff. Tortured people, and they would torture people until they gave up other people. And if you're tortured enough, you're just going to start saying whatever they want to say.
Right.
But they literally kept a file on every single person they executed, or in every single person that died in Khmer custody.
That's odd. What do they do with all the files?
They kept them. They just like filing cabinets just full.
Systematic.
Yes, absolutely. Wow. And they actually they took photos of all of the corpses.
Oh.
So they had photos of the people before interrogation, whatever, and they had photos of the post. And a couple of the museums you can go to in Cambodia, they literally will have just walls of photos of either people or photos were taken before people died, or the photos taken after they were dead.
Oh.
And
that's disturbing.
It's very disturbing, but they really believed what they were doing was the right thing to do. What puts someone in that state of mind to think this is a good idea?
Yeah.
I don't know. That one to me is scary because it was Cambodians against Cambodia. So it was your own people. That's just like you walking into downtown Annapolis and just deciding, you know what the problem with Annapolis is? We have, 2 times as many people as we really need. So I'm just going to start indiscriminately killing people.
Yeah. That's what a lot of people think about stuff, is that there's just too many people here, or we can't support all these people, or that we don't make enough food for all these people. And if there was fewer, then it's not an idea that's just disappeared. That's still out there.
It continues to happen. It's happened all throughout history.
Any reason is really not good, but sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, there is no good reason. It stems from hatred or jealousy.
Yeah.
And what it really comes down to, I guess if you really want to get religious standpoint, it comes from idolatry in some way, shape, or form. There is something in your mind that you are worshiping that is causing this hatred for this particular group or for these people or whatever it is. The Ottomans, more or less by the Turks, but they were part of the Ottoman Empire at the time. The Armenians, the Greeks, they were, again, another group that was just indiscriminate. They just liked killing people, and so they did it a lot. And it's almost unfathomable. But a lot of people don't use the United States government treatment of American Indians. They don't treat that as a genocide, and I cannot figure out why. I think it's because it wasn't deliberately systematic. It was systematic in the way that they dealt with the Indians, but they weren't deliberately trying to kill them. They were just trying to take their land and push them somewhere else. So I think that there should be a caveat to the genocide rule. I think there can be an unintentional.
That's one of the international groups are trying to push that if you have, I can't remember what location it was at. It's fairly recent, but all they did was they took all the people and they moved them out. So they didn't go in and kill everybody, but they pretty much wiped out their culture. And they're trying to say, well, that's included under genocide as well. For some reason, there's some pushback saying, well, you didn't massacre all the people, so that doesn't really count. But you killed all their culture and spread everybody out.
So I guess that would be considered like a cultural genocide. You're not necessarily
a distinction on there. It makes people upset, or because it's when you put an extra term in there, it makes it seem like it's not as big of a deal. But then when other people were part of those groups that were massacred, they said, well, you're still alive. You could go back anytime. But either case is just terrible.
Well, just like millions. Who knows how many? There's no way to know how many millions of American Indians died as a direct result of U.S. government policies.
Yeah, you don't learn about that in history class.
No.
That's kind of just gone.
It's millions. Millions and millions. I mean, who knows? And then you think about the Spanish conquistadors in Central and South America.
Yeah.
They didn't hate the natives. They wanted what the natives had. Again, back to idolatry. They wanted the gold and they wanted the silver. They wanted what they had. They wanted the precious gems. They wanted the treasures. But they could have cared less about the native population. Again, this is sort of an accidental genocide. They brought in diseases that the natives just had no resistance to. Syphilis and smallpox and like all of these things that just ravaged the population. There were entire groups that were effectively completely eradicated within only a few years as a result of the introduction of smallpox into a group. And they just had no natural resistance to it at all. So they just died. Smallpox is an extremely lethal disease.
Right.
And in some cases, it was deliberate.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember learning about that in some of our history books was, the great Spanish people came over and they fought against the natives. And one of the things that helped them was they all got diseases and died. It's like, how's that? That's just not a great thing.
It's really sad that as a human race, we can't look past those things.
Right.
There's no people that I would say that I hate. I'm certainly not a racist. I certainly don't look at myself from a racial standpoint or an economic standpoint or a social standpoint above anyone else. We all get weirded out when, if you're in like downtown Baltimore or something, you're going to a nose game or whatever, and you get sort of accosted by a homeless person or a squeegee kid on the street wanting to wash your windows. We all have that thought. It's like, go out and get a job or get a real job, whatever. But I don't think that I'm above this person from like a socioeconomic standpoint. I mean, yes, I make more money than this person, but from an inside perspective, this person is no different than me.
Right.
If you cut us, we're all going to bleed red. We're all the same. Culturally, yeah. I mean, it's just different. And
because the guy squeegeed your car and wants a couple bucks, you wouldn't go and want to wipe out all of Baltimore.
Exactly. I'm not gonna want to go and kill all the squeegee kids because
right.
It's just
or
a
even
silly idea.
The whole city, just because this is how the people work. I don't know, but it seems like when you look back at like the Holocaust and all those other genocides, it's like, how did that even occur? But even today, even though we think we're so smart and we've made such an advance in society and technology, we still deal with the same thing. Like we're no different.
We are the dumbest smart people on the planet. We just perpetually doing dumb stuff.
Yeah.
Dumb stuff. When are we going to get past this point? We're always going to have different peoples.
Right.
Okay. We range the kind of colors of the rainbow.
Yeah.
From bright white all the way down to like purple. And I can't figure out racism. That one really bothers me too.
It's odd.
I don't figure that out. You and I we happen to be religious people. So I guess in that sense, we're biased. We don't look at the world in a hateful way. We look at it in a way that we want to better the world. Like, I want to leave the world better than how I entered it.
Yeah.
And I want to leave it better for my children. And I want to teach my children the same thing. I want them to better the world.
Right.
That should be their goal in life. But I guess part of it is what's better. If you really think about it, your definition of better and my definition of better may be close to the same. But my definition of better, I may want to take a religious mission to some Central African country to dig wells to give people fresh water. And they may think that's a really silly idea. Why would you want to do that?
Right.
So I think there's varying degrees. I think that's part of the problem too. It's just that geographically, we're really spread out. So our ideals are different, just accident of geography in a lot of cases.
Yeah. Even though you look back at some of the ones that have happened, like at least even the ones that are more recent, last 50 years or so, still going on. The events that are going on in China where like they just don't like the Tibetan people. First, they just tried to go in and just wipe everybody out. And then they went into, well, it seems like the world doesn't like that. So we're just going to pick everybody up and move them. And the world doesn't really seem to like that. So now we're just going to go in and teach them different things that are against their culture and try and change what they think anyways.
Yes, they're trying to breed their culture out effectively over generations. And when did the Chinese invaded Tibet? What was that, in the 30s?
I have to look it up. I don't know.
I want to say it was in the 30s. But since then, I mean, you got to figure that's only a couple of generations. My grandparents were born in the 1920s. So that's really only 3 generations removed. 2 generations removed from us. 3 generations removed from our children. How many generations would it take?
It says 1950.
1950?
Mm-hmm. 1949, 1950.
Okay. But how many generations would it take to breed out somebody's culture? I don't think too many.
You wouldn't think so. I mean, look at how quickly ideas have changed in the last 10 years or so, like just in our own country. How different views on a topic have flip-flopped almost completely. I mean, when you throw a media in and kids are growing up and then they want to learn and then all you keep feeding them propaganda, you can get people to change their point of view on a lot of things rather quickly.
Yeah, here we are back at 1984 again.
Yeah.
Thank you, George
since
Orwell.
1950 they've been working on this, China and Tibet, and there's no real stopping of it. They're just continuing. I guess what concerns me is there's not been a lot of international pressure against making that stop, or government pressure. There's a lot of private groups that do not like it, and they're trying to influence things, but the fact that it's been going on for 70 years now.
I would say China's sort of an anomaly.
Yeah.
And I think one of the biggest reasons is because the country as a whole is more or less self-sufficient.
Yeah.
There's not a heck of a lot we can do from like an international sanction standpoint that's going to hurt the Chinese government.
Yeah, they're pretty large. They have a lot of their own resources.
Yeah, they have a lot of their own resources, not to mention they have a massive population.
They do.
1.5 billion Chinese people or something. So it's an issue because you can't go militarily against China. That would be disastrous.
Yeah.
Economically, we can't do an awful lot to them. So the only thing we have is rhetoric against the Chinese. And don't think for a second that the U.S. government and other governments around the world don't spend a lot of time and effort spinning negative propaganda against the Chinese government. Just like, you think about poor countries like Iran. We know a couple of Iranians personally. And I know that the government is kind of messed up. It's an Islamic Republic, and that's perfectly fine. If everybody agrees that that's the way that they should do it, then that's probably the way they should do it. Is it repressive? Maybe. Is it dangerous? Definitely, I think in some cases. But the country has no ability to fight back. They kind of have to be self-sufficient. But the one thing that they have that everybody needs is oil. So that's their kind of bargaining chip. So they're able to sort of maintain themselves because of the resources that they have. Whereas the Chinese, they're kind of like an octopus. Okay, you got the main body, which would be China, but they got tentacles. We'll use that word instead of tendrils. They have tentacles everywhere. And the government does this. They send entire companies of Chinese people to do things like illegal mining.
Yeah.
They send them to like African countries like Ghana that have gold resources in areas where you're not supposed to mine. They just send them there and tell them to go mine, and they do.
Right.
Because the government has told them to do so, and they're supported by the government. But what's Ghana going to do against, 1.5 billion Chinese people? Nothing. They can't muster a defense against it.
Yeah, a lot of times they just say, well, I know it's not legal here, but here's a truckload of money to the local person in charge.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like, just look the other way.
Yeah, and it was, I'm trying to remember how many years ago this was. Do you remember the oil sands boom?
Oh, yeah.
That happened in North Dakota and eastern Montana.
Yeah.
Well, the oil sands, there's tons of that stuff in Canada.
Okay.
I mean, it's everywhere in Canada. And the way the oil sands work, for those who are listening who don't know, is that oil sands is like an oil deposit, but it's not in like a lake form of oil deposit like you have in the Middle East. Yeah. Like in the Middle East, you can dig down 10 feet and just find yourself in a pool of oil. Right. Whereas oil sands are really just oil-soaked sands or rock, which is what fracking is used for.
Mm-hmm.
They're able to kind of extract this oil from these oil sands. And there is massive reserves of oil sands, but it's more expensive to extract than, say, sweet crude that you would get from the Middle East or something. So it's not economically feasible until oil is over a certain price per barrel.
Right.
So that was one of the arguments that the oil sands industry had, is that when oil started creeping up in price, mid 2000s,
Mm-hmm.
oil started going like way high. It was over $100 a barrel.
Right.
What OPEC decided to do is like, you know what, we're actually going to increase our production a little bit. So what they were doing specifically was driving the price of oil down, and it caused these oil sands companies to kind of not necessarily go belly up, but it made it economically infeasible for them to start pumping out oil. So with this massive amount of oil sands reserves that they have it in Western Canada, the Chinese government actually came in and said to the Canadian government, hey, we want to buy the rights for these oil sands for this region. And they were going to pay them some insane amount of money. It was billions of dollars. And the Canadian government thought that was a good idea.
Oh, yeah?
And then it was the American government who actually stepped in and said, you know what? You are not going to allow the Chinese to do this. We're going to find out some other method, because we did not want the Chinese government to gain control over that much of a natural resource, because then that's one thing China does not have a lot of.
Right.
They do not have a bunch of oil. They have to go someplace else to get it. So that's kind of a bargaining chip for us against the Chinese government.
Yeah.
This is a heavy-duty episode, man. This is crazy stuff. I hope our fans enjoy this one.
I do too.
This has been fun. So we started out with genocide.
Yeah. Oh, so anyways, before you get too far off of the topic,
Okay.
so we're talking about China and how, well, the government can do their propaganda machines and everything like that. But still, a lot of people know, maybe a lot of people don't know about what they do with their population and how they're rooting out religion, and they have to be in control of everything. One China, I think, is their motto.
Yeah.
A lot of our businesses are sending all of their manufacturing to China. So it's kind of, we know you're doing all this terrible stuff, but we're still going to send you all this
Yes,
other
but
stuff.
that is not a government policy.
No.
Because the United States government we are not a democracy. I don't even know if this is a word, but I made this word up the other day, because I think we had this discussion a few days ago. We're a capitocracy.
Yeah, I think you made that one up.
Yeah,
but it makes sense.
Yes, because our government is completely controlled by capitalism. And as a result, the government only has certain amounts of power over large corporations. So if Corporation X wants to build a production facility in China, the government's really not going to stop them from doing that. So you can't look at corporate involvement in China as a U.S. government policy, an American people policy.
Right.
It's just literally Corporation X. Corporation X kind of functions like the Cayman Islands. They're sort of independent of anything. They can really do whatever they want within certain guidelines. But in China, there are only five, I want to say it's 5 cities where they're deemed economic development zones by the Chinese government. So there's really only 5 regions where companies can go and actually set up foreign shops. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I guess that explains why they all seem to be centered around certain spots.
Yes, it's a direct result of policies set forth by the Chinese government.
Okay.
But it's also a reason why these cities are absolutely huge.
Oh.
Because these companies keep moving production facilities and things there. Well, they need people to work there.
Yeah.
And so what they're doing is basically draining the Chinese rural regions of people. You can go out to some of these like rural areas in China and you won't find a single person between the age of 18 and 50 because they've all moved to the cities to work.
Yeah, there was a good movie, it was well done movie about, I can't remember what it is, where it described their lifestyle now, where when a husband and wife get married, they'll have a child, and when the child's, I don't know, a year or 2 old, they send the child to live with the grandparents, and then the 2 parents go into the industrial center, and they'll work for like 20 years. But then they'll come back like for a week once a year to see their child until they're 60 and they can't work anymore. Then they move back to the rural center, and then they take care of their grandkid, and it's the same cycle. Yeah. And that's just a crazy idea to not see your kid just to be able to have work to do.
It's absolutely crazy the way that it works. But that's Chinese government policy in action.
Yeah.
And that's scary. Sadly enough, there have been plenty of genocides perpetrated by the Chinese government against their own people.
Yeah.
The Great Leap Forward. I mean, how many millions of Chinese people starved to death?
Yeah.
Lots. And for similar reasons, the Soviets starved people to death. The Chinese people didn't do it deliberately, but they didn't care. The government didn't care that these people were starving. They did, I guess, in a roundabout sense, but they knew that the policies they had enacted were dangerous, and they also knew that it was just something they had to get through, and it wasn't a big deal. We look back, I'm sure you remember this, I very vividly remember the Tiananmen Square incident, where what you had was thousands of Chinese students, basically. These were all university students. They were basically protesting the policies of the Chinese government. And what did the Chinese government do? They sent in troops.
Right.
And for a while it was okay, but then the troops just decided we're just going to start shooting people. And that's what they did. They shot hundreds of students who were peacefully protesting. They weren't like turning cars over and setting stuff on fire. They were literally just protesting government policies that were dangerous to the Chinese people. And the government just sends in their troops, and the troops who have no... I think that they specifically, and I could be wrong, but I swear I remember reading this. They specifically sent in army units that were not local, so there was no chance. There was no chance that they would know people at the demonstration. And then you had Tank Man.
Yeah,
they don't know what happened to him.
Well, I guess for sure. I think we kind of know, but.
Oh, he was definitely executed. I have no doubt about that. But they don't know when he stood there. I mean, that was a very extremely brave thing for him to do. I don't think I would stand in front of a moving tank.
No.
The people who came and whisked him away, they don't know. They were never able to identify those people. So the conspiracy thought is those were actually members of the Chinese secret police who just literally whisked him off and executed him.
Right.
But nobody has ever stepped forward and said, hey, this is so-and-so. But if you go to China, you go to Beijing and you go on Google and you type in Tiananmen Square, that doesn't even come up in a Google search. It's completely censored.
Right. You
go to Google right now and type in Tiananmen Square, the very first hit is probably going to be
that picture
of this picture of Tank Man standing there. And you go to China, it doesn't even show up. It's not even on their radar.
It's 1984. It's been
absolutely. They have absolutely altered their history or removed things, selectively removed things from history to make themselves look better.
Yeah.
And that's really dangerous. But I think that, getting back to genocide, that leads to complete and total domination. And subjugation is really, I guess, a really big part of it.
Yeah.
Societies don't function well when people don't function together. From an idea standpoint, I guess it makes... I'm not saying genocide makes sense, but on one hand, you could see the path, I guess, that somebody would take to get there. Because if you're not functioning as a unit, you're not functioning well.
Yeah, I suppose so.
I mean,
you don't see the benefits of different perspectives and you just want one, I guess that's their view.
I mean, look at the way the military operates.
Yeah, and there's that mob mentality too, where if the whole group's going, I'm going too. But that makes you think, well, the guy driving the tank, everyone was yelling at him, probably just keep going. But at least he was strong enough to think on his own. It's like, I don't want to run over this person. I think some of the stories have come out from people who have left China that were the soldiers at that time. Like, I'm an 18-year-old kid, and they're telling me to shoot other 18-year-old kids for not doing anything, and they just couldn't. It was tough being at that situation. But one more thing.
Yes.
So I've been wondering, what do we do? Like, how do we not have this going forward? And after World War II, they tried to put in a lot of breaks to make sure that this kind of stuff, or tried to make sure this stuff doesn't happen. I mean, they tried after World War I to not have any more world wars, and that didn't work out so well. So they have like this international group that is supposed to be charged with bringing genocidal crimes against countries. And all the countries were supposed to say, I'm going to take part in this, except there was a caveat that some countries put in, and U.S. is one of them, saying, you can't charge us with genocidal crimes unless we agree to be charged with genocidal crimes.
Well, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
Isn't it? This isn't going to work. If the U.S. says you can't charge us with crimes unless we agree to it, how would we ever charge anybody else? Or be on a panel that says, you know what you're doing is wrong. It's like, it doesn't matter. They're probably doing the same thing, but you say no. So there's some significant flaws in the way the world is thinking.
And again, this comes down to specifically the The thought mentality from one culture to another it can be completely turned around and backwards.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say we, the American public in general looks at Muslims as being completely backward culturally. Right. And that's totally not true.
Yeah.
I've lived in a Muslim country, and most Muslims are no different than most Americans.
Yeah.
The ideology in there, it's like we're all different, but we all have to understand that we're all different. Chinese people look at us and probably think that, oh, crazy Americans.
That's probably true.
It seems like a lot of Russians, a lot of like Eastern Europeans look at Americans as like cowboys. Yeah. We're loud, we're boisterous, we love our guns, we just like to shoot stuff. That's the image that we have perpetuated throughout the world. I mean, that's how a lot of other cultures look at Americans. And I find it funny. When you go to foreign countries, a lot of times the young people are very interested in you. When I lived in an Arab country, a lot of the young people, they loved just talking to you.
Oh, yeah.
About, American stuff. Because they didn't get they got a lot of American stuff there. It was a very westernized Muslim country, but they didn't get a lot of the like daily interaction with the West. They just got the snippets of movies or music or whatever. So they just thought it was really neat, and they were very friendly. Yeah, very friendly people. They weren't, oh, you crazy Americans, but it was obvious that they thought we were kind of nuts.
Yeah, I'd say probably most people are friendly.
Yeah,
it's just when you get weird ideologies in there, it just skews people.
So this has been really. Are we going to end on something light here?
You said you had something.
No, I didn't. I said we should.
Oh,
I don't have anything light in particular that we need to talk about, but we really should, because this has just been like, whew. We're going to send people on like a downward shame spiral.
I can give you an update.
Okay.
On this. It's not up your alley, but I finally watched this documentary. It had been coming up in my YouTube feed. So you watch YouTube, right? And then when you watch a video, YouTube algorithms say, okay, well, you've watched these 3 videos. You're really going to love these 30. So everything gets put in there. Okay.
I actually don't like that, but yeah.
Yeah, sometimes you get good ones. This one was interesting. We were talking about the marble runs.
Yeah, it's funny because I was going to say, is this about Gel's marble run?
So I told you there was some controversy about red number 3 and how he won the sand championship, I think in 2018. I mean, he was really far ahead of everybody. So there was a documentary on red number 3. And they did it well. And they interviewed other marbles.
Okay, did they test him for steroids? Performance-enhancing
drugs?
They
did. But it turns out he wasn't really a marble. He had started his life as a keychain, and he had through somewhat natural means, turned himself from a keychain into a marble. But he still has the hole in his backside where the keychain attached.
So was he more of like a ball bearing, or was he actually made of glass?
It said that he followed the rules for weight and size.
Okay.
So he was within the... It's like, you probably don't know this because you don't watch NASCAR racing, but when they do NASCAR races, they have templates that they put on the car to make sure you're within tolerance. Yeah. So he met the tolerances for weight and size, and that's where some of the
You know what I bet you it was?
What?
I'm totally spitballing here.
Yeah.
I bet you he was actually spherical, as opposed to like all the other marbles.
He's got a hole in the bottom, though.
It doesn't matter.
That's going to cause some... It's going to cause some hiccups. But maybe in the sand
it'll just whistle. And maybe sandpack the hole or whatever, but he's probably spherical, whereas the other, for anybody who actually went out and watched, the marbles kind of jump around because they're not perfectly round.
Yeah.
I bet you he was perfectly round, which is he probably ran a lot smoother and therefore ran faster.
But it's on the sand. I don't think that takes as much.
I bet you it does.
But he does have some videos where he uses ball bearings, like a pusher, in case they get stuck or they're trailing too slow behind, because they'll go much faster. I guess their mass is. Yeah. So he starts the marbles, and then a couple seconds later, he'll start the ball bearing to help the stuck guys.
I can't believe we're talking about this again. That was so weird.
It's fun to watch. You really start cheering them on after a while. Pick a special team. I prefer the Midnight Wisps.
Oh, the Midnight Wisps.
They did good in the Olympics last year.
They were Team Olympics?
Team Olympic. Yeah, I told you this. They have the Midnight Wisps, and then they have like the primaries. They all represent different marble countries.
Okay.
Okay.
Gel's Marble Run, ladies and gentlemen. Gel's Marble Run.
Yeah.
Riveting material.
Hey, you wanted something fun. Not much more fun than marbles.
I guess that's true.
You have anything else?
No, I think that's going to have to tear it for the day. This has been a heavy-duty episode. We hope you folks have enjoyed it. I guess that's going to have to be it for the day, Jason.
I think so.